So, Minister, you've been a staunch defender of Theresa May's deal over the past couple of weeks. What were your feelings on learning that the vote on it was postponed?
Well, I think we're all having to acknowledge that nearly 100 Conservative MPs had come out publicly saying that they wouldn't vote for the deal. So there wasn't much point taking it to the House of Commons when there was a certainty that we would not be able to get it through. The point is to get the deal through, not to go through the parliamentary procedure for the sake of parliamentary procedure. So we're going to have to go back to Europe, we're going to have to talk again, and we're going to have to see if we can come up with some compromises which can get it through. But in the end, a deal with the European Union will look quite a lot like this deal.
But just your leader has said that she does still believe in this deal, that this piece of legislation that she's unable to put in front of the House for fear of getting it voted down. By what definition do you still have a working government?
So we still have a working government in the sense that we are the government. The problem isn't in terms of the normal actions government. For example, I'm the prisons minister and I'm still going about my everyday business working on trying to resolve some really tricky, challenging problems in 10 prisons at the moment. And I'm going tomorrow in front of the Justice Select Committee to talk about our prison estate transformation program. This isn't really about the everyday operations of government which continue. This is specifically about a Brexit deal. And the problem, as the Prime Minister, I think, articulated quite well in the House today, is that there are some people who seem to want no Brexit at all, so they're not going to want a Brexit deal, and there are some people who want no deal at all, so they're not going to want a Brexit deal. But if there is a majority for a Brexit deal, then it ought to feel a little bit like this. The question is, how are we going to get Parliament, a parliamentary majority, behind it?
You mentioned going back to Europe to get more concessions, particularly on the backstop, which the Prime Minister says was the major issue with the rest of the Conservative Party. Europe says it won't give any concessions. If that is the case, what happens then?
Well, clearly we're going to have to try to get a common ground between Parliament and the European Union. It's not an easy thing to do. On the European Union side, you're dealing with these 27 member states, and in the case of Parliament, you're dealing with 650 individuals, which is why this is a very tricky negotiation, and really why, for my money, we should be being a little bit more realistic and accepting the only way you can do a negotiation properly is by having one person, the Prime Minister, do that negotiation. What the public can give is the framework, which is that we want to leave the European Union, and Parliament can try to steer some of what's involved in that, but the detail of that 500-page document and all the compromises you need to make is something that takes literally months of negotiation, and there's no point pretending that 650 individuals can micromanage that process. It's not going to result in a good deal for Britain or a good deal for Europe.
Are you saying then there shouldn't be a vote on it in Parliament?
We have to, I think, in the end, do a vote on it because Parliament decided it wanted a meaningful vote on the agreement. But I hope that as we come to that vote and we have a little bit of time to reflect and we have another chance to talk to the European Union, people are a little bit more realistic about the fact that even if you were to have another Prime Minister, even if you were to set off in a hard Brexit direction, even if you were to spend another 3-4 years in a no-deal scenario, which I think would be very, very damaging to our economy, you would probably end up with something that felt a bit like this deal, because this deal basically reflects the British red lines, which are that we want to control immigration, we don't want to pay billions of pounds a year to the European Union, but also reflects the fact that Europe is our major trading partner, and we want to have close relationships with Europe, and we want to protect our car industry. If you're trying to do those things, you're not going to end up with anything that looks very different to this deal.
Finally then, Minister, if Theresa May isn't able to secure more concessions, if she isn't able to bring a deal which looks different enough to get a majority in the House, the clock is ticking, we are approaching a no-deal exit of the European Union. Would you do everything in your power to avoid that?
I certainly would, because the problem with a no-deal exit is that it begins to feel not like a no-deal, but a never deal. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that if we go into a no deal, it will be because there is no parliamentary majority for anything. And were we to crash out in April in that situation, there would probably still not be a parliamentary majority for anything. That means there wouldn't be a parliamentary majority for the details of a deal you wanted to strike with the United States. That would mean you wouldn't have a parliamentary deal for what future, parliamentary majority for what future deal you wanted to strike with the European Union. So the fundamental divisions and problems within British politics would mean that international investors wouldn't just say, you now have a problem to do with what we will have a problem on, inflation, household incomes, interest rates, and potentially problems on the borders at Calais. We'd have a much deeper problem, which is that investors would have absolutely no confidence that we had a route map out of this deal, this no-deal situation, which is why we need a withdrawal agreement, and we need the transition period. There's no transition period without a withdrawal agreement, and the transition period is what gives us the certainty through to the end of 2020, which is the time that we need to try to get our act together.
But how far do you go on this? Would you look at another election, a referendum, something to actually break that parliamentary deadlock?
No, because I believe that in the end, if people can begin to set aside the party divisions and the personality politics here and just look coldly at this deal, they would recognize that, broadly speaking, this is the most plausible, sensible deal that we're going to get. And that trying to reject it, believing that we're either going to get a second referendum and remain in the European Union forever, on the one hand, or trying to believe that by rejecting it we can somehow suddenly turn ourselves into Singapore, on the other hand, these things are not realistic. These aren't serious proposals. In fact, of the 8 proposals that are currently floating around Parliament, only one of them is actually a deal. The others are wish lists which have not been negotiated with the European Union. This is the only 500-page deal, and any deal with the European Union will have to look a great deal like this.